Hello everyone, this is Mike and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be looking at setting up PowerShell version 7 and Visual Studio Code on a new Windows 11 PC. So we'll look at where to get and download and install PowerShell 7, how to install and configure Visual Studio Code, looking at adding the PowerShell extensions into Visual Studio Code and maybe doing a couple setups to it, in the auspice that you're going to be using it mainly with doing PowerShell scripts, which is what I would be up to with it. And finally, I'll just do a brief kind of look here at installing some RSAT tools in Windows 11. Because that might not be that familiar to a lot of you folks that are maybe coming from earlier times when we used to download the RSAT tools and install them onto a Windows computer, specifically a Windows client computer, to get all of the server management tools from there. Um, Now you might be thinking, well, you're doing PowerShell. Why do you want the RSAT tools? Well, that's a way to get the PowerShell modules for a lot of these technologies. So if I want the Active Directory PowerShell tools, if I want the DNS tools, the DHCP tools, so on. So we'll have a look at where that is in Windows 11. All right, so let me switch over to my VM here. And this is a newly installed Windows 11 VM. So this is the background that you get by default, the start menu that you get, and so on. Now with it, I normally, again, I haven't used Windows 11 that long. So to say I normally, well, what I'm starting to do is on a Windows 11 setup here. I normally do a couple quick mods here just to make it behave a bit like Windows 10, which is what I'm more used to. Okay, so what I do is I could right click the taskbar and you can get taskbar settings. And when I open that up, on the personalization menu here, if you kind of go down, kind of scroll down on the right side pane here, you can see taskbar behaviors. If you expand that out, you can see taskbar alignment. I normally shift it to the left. And then if I scroll back up, there's a couple things there that I don't really like to see. I don't want the widgets. I don't want the chat. And so that now kind of makes it behave a bit like Windows 10, if you will. All right, so we have that. All right. Now, the next part here is we need to install PowerShell 7. So you might be thinking, well, why do I need to install that? Because if you look at an existing Windows installation, again, this could be Windows 10 or Windows 11, or even the servers, mind you, Windows Server 16, Server 19, Server 2022, what have you. If you click Start and type like Power, you'll see that PowerShell is present on a Windows computer by default. So if I kind of open it up here, I could see that I have Windows PowerShell. Okay, so if I use the variable $PS version table, I could see that it is version 5.1 of PowerShell, of Windows PowerShell. Right? So this particular version of PowerShell is using the regular .NET framework that comes with your Windows operating system by default. Now, with using a Windows computer, you could very well stick with, version 5.1 and call it a day. But it is not the current version. So when PowerShell went to version 6, they basically made it kind of a vendor neutral edition. So PowerShell has support for Windows, Mac, and Linux nowadays. And when running PowerShell on Linux and Mac, it uses a different version of .NET Framework, something called .NET Core, which is basically a stripped down version of the full framework that can run on a Linux or a Mac OS. Now, the PowerShell that goes with that started with version 6 and is now, at the time I'm recording this video, is 7.2 is the current stable release, and 7.3 is kind of like the new beta version, if you will. So with it, you can actually have two different versions of PowerShell running. So consider 5.1 is what comes with the Windows OS. What's considered like feature complete, if you will, for that time frame, and is referred to as Windows PowerShell. So the two words there, Windows PowerShell. And then version 6 and newer, so I'm actually going to be installing 7.2 on this computer, is just referred to as PowerShell, no Windows on it. So when we're referring to them by the names, Windows PowerShell, we're referring to the version that comes with Windows and is going to be topped out at version 5.1. So it's been like feature complete for quite a while. No new features adding into it and so on. And then the newer PowerShell, which we refer to just as PowerShell now, no Windows on it, just PowerShell, that is currently at version 7.2, and it is going to be a separate install. It has a separate installation directory, separate executable. So you could actually, or not you can, you will actually have both versions side by side installed on a Windows computer, if it is a Windows computer you're using here. All right. So in our case, we're using Windows 11, and that's what I'm going to be setting this stuff up on. All right. So by default, again, we have version 5.1, and there we go. So if I want to install Windows, I'm sorry, not Windows, PowerShell version 7 from the 5.1 console, there is a kind of a command line utility I could use called Winget. So if I type in Winget, this is basically a command line utility enabling installing apps and other packages from the command line. Right? So kind of has a feel to it of like the if you work in Azure, the Azure CLI, the command line interface. So if you wanted to use this, this is, I guess, Microsoft's preferred method for installing PowerShell 7. So basically, you can find it out there. So if you type in Winget search, and the name that I'm looking for is PowerShell, we could see it does a search. Do you agree it needs to send my locale up there? So I'll say yes. And then I get for search results here anything that has the word PowerShell in its name. So there's these three ones up here which are unknown. Here's PowerShell ID Microsoft.PowerShell, so that's where we're going to install it with. And you see 7.2, and then there's the PowerShell preview, and that is currently at 7.3. Okay, so this is the one that we're going to want to install. Okay, so I could go ahead and use Winget. We're going to do install. ID is Microsoft.PowerShell. And the source in this case is just Winget. So we'll go ahead and run that. Let it do its thing. So it's going to download the package and go ahead and install this on my computer. So pretty exciting process here. So you have to say yes to the UAC prompt. So I'll just go ahead and confirm that. And let that install and see how it's referred to as just PowerShell 7. All right. Now, if I close this PowerShell console and go to my start here, if I type in power, you could see that there's Windows PowerShell. So again, that's the version 5.1, and you see PowerShell 7 right here. Okay, so that's the 7.2 version of PowerShell. So again, they are kind of running side by side here. In fact, if we take the PowerShell 7 here, notice you can see that in the taskbar. But if I come back here for PowerShell 7 to maybe open the file location and then go ahead and look at the shortcut on it, you can see that it's not running. Normally PowerShell runs out of the Windows directory. So C Windows, so it's down in there, and this new version of PowerShell is running out of program files, right? So that's there, and again, the original version of PowerShell, Windows System 32. Remember where they put this, Windows PowerShell version 1. So this is the installation directory for the PowerShell that comes with, Windows by default, hence Windows PowerShell. So this is the 5.1 version. And PowerShell 7 is hanging out in the program files directory. All right. So they are different. Now, normally what I do, let me start back with a blank desktop here, is I use PowerShell enough that I normally dock them down on the taskbar here. So I've been doing that for years with PowerShell. So if I kind of bring Power here, find Windows PowerShell, right click and say pin to my taskbar. So that, again, when you launch it, if I do the PS version table, I could see, again, the version 5.1. All right. Now, can I also dock 7 down on the taskbar? Yes, it is a different program, right? So I can bring this up. So type power, there's PowerShell 7, right click, and pin to taskbar as well. Okay, so you have both of them kind of going side by side. Now, one of the things that I've noticed with Windows 11 is when you launch either version, so like literally here's both of them running, they both use a black background. And so what I normally like to do, and again, you could do this if you like, or obviously not, but I usually like to alter one of these. So it looks like how PowerShell would be launched in, like, let's say Windows 10, which is it has kind of like a bluish style background. So what you could do is I'll take the Windows PowerShell, I'll put my cursor somewhere along the top bar here, right click, go to Properties, and first of all, I normally go to Font, and I usually like to use a slightly bigger font. Makes it easier to see, so I usually pick like a 20, and then on the font, the old PowerShell consoles always used Lucida Console as the font. It's a good, with proportional font, so each character takes the same amount of space. So then I go into layout and maybe change the width and the height a little bit. So that way it fits in the border of my window here. So maybe I'll cut this down to 100, and that should fix that. And then lastly, the color. The background color of the original PowerShell console is not in kind of like the quick colors here. I wish it was. So you gotta have to mix your own. So the RGB values you're looking for, red is 1, green is 36, and blue is 86. Um, and so that'll make that blue background that we're used to on kind of the older PowerShell consoles. And then the text, if you want to maybe make it, I know a little lighter, so maybe like use like a close to white, not completely white, but closer to solid white, you could do that and hit OK. And we have uh, we have this all done here, and now it looks like the old style, PowerShell console, if you will. All right. So again, depending on if you wanted to use that, you could make this now look different. So now, the PowerShell 7 could be your black. I would still modify the font stuff on here because I still like Lucida console on a 20 with the layout. Again, maybe 100 by 30. Okay, so still like that. So go ahead and put that in, and let's close that, relaunch it, um, and yeah, uh, let's see what was going on with this. Let me launch this as admin. think that might fix because I was getting that error about the shortcut cannot be updated here. So bear with me one sec. We'll set a console layout, change that back to 100, and OK. So that held on there. Let's close it, reopen it, and oops, I'm sorry, reopen it as admin guy, and it's holding on to those changes. Okay, cool. So that gets us set here. Okay, so we now have PowerShell 7. Again, if I use the variable here, $ps version table, I can see that we're using 7.2. All right. So that now has both of them all ready to go. All right. So the next part here, actually, let me double back for a sec here. So the version or the way that I used to install PowerShell here, I used Winget. And that's perfectly fine and acceptable if you're on a client computer. What if you happen to be on a server? So this is obviously not, the Winget method's not going to work on a server, let's say. Or maybe you don't want to use Winget, you want to use some other way. So if you head out to github.com and up in GitHub here, search for PowerShell, you should see, like in the first search result here, you see PowerShell. You can open that up and then kind of go down here and you have all the different MSIs for the different distributions of PowerShell. So we might want either the Windows 64-bit or the Windows 32-bit. You can get the long-term support one, the MSI for that, or the current stable build, or the preview build if you wanted to jump ahead. So the stable build, that was 7.2, and the preview, that was 7.3. So if I wanted the MSI, I could go ahead and click that. It downloads it to my downloads folder, which I could then have a look at, and there we go. So there's the MSI of PowerShell 7.2. Not too big, 104 meg, so not horrible. So if you wanted to have that, and then now you have that, that could be stored on a file share somewhere, distributed around. There's lots of different ways to automate deploying an MSI. If you have Configuration Manager or MDT, or you want to install it in a computer that you're making a reference image from, lots of options there. All right. So now, one of the things that you will find with PowerShell is, let's say I'm on the old PowerShell console here, and I type in ISE, I get the integrated scripting environment, which has been my kind of like go-to editor for a long time now. Right? So I mean, you could use third-party script editors. If you want to use Visual Studio, the Community Edition is free. If you wanted to use Primal Script, I mean, there's lots of script editors out there. But ISE always came for free with PowerShell version 5. Well, with PowerShell versions up to version 5.1. So normally with the ISE, I would bump, if you look down here in the bottom right, I normally bump the zoom up till the font's a little bigger, makes it easier to work with. Okay, so this is the editor that comes for free with PowerShell 5.1. If I try to do the same thing in PowerShell 7 here, ISE, there is no script editor for that. Okay, so the ISE version of PowerShell, if I just launch, the ISE again, and the console that opens up in it, you will see that I should have done this before I closed it before. But if I, look at, version table, again, it's 5.1. So the PowerShell ISE is using Windows PowerShell version 5.1. So what if I wanted to use an editor that would use PowerShell 7, but I don't want to spend any money? Okay, so I still want it to be free. So that's where Visual Studio Code comes into play. This is a free script editor that can do more than just PowerShell, obviously. Visual Studio Code can do a lot of other things as well. And that might be, the best free editor we have to be able to work with PowerShell 7. Okay, so again, I'm highlighting the free part there. So anybody can kind of take away from that what you will. There may be better script editors out there, but I don't want to ask anybody to spend any money here. That's kind of not what I'm about when it comes to these videos. I hate it when I see people do other trainings, other videos like, "Hey, look at this cool product," and oh, it's only like so much amount of money, right? So if you look at pretty much anything I throw up on my channel, I'm always about the free. So if you haven't checked out, for instance, my GUI series, how to make a PowerShell graphical script, I do it with free tools. I'm not asking you to spend any money. All right, so what can we do here? So first thing is we got to get Visual Studio Code. So if I kind of open up, go to your favorite internet search engine, whatever you use, Visual Studio Code, you can type in, and you should see on the first search result here, Visual Studio Code. There is a download link there, so you could select that. And that brings us to this page right here. And you can see for Visual Studio Code, there's a Windows distribution, there's for Linux environments, there's for Mac as well. Okay, so in my case here, I'm going to take the user installer 64-bit. So I can go ahead and click that. Okay, it started the download right there. So if I open up my downloads folder, there it is. So Visual Studio Code, I can double click it and go ahead and walk through the setup here. Accept the license agreement, Visual Studio Code, maybe create a desktop icon. You could also add these other options if you like. I'm just going to leave it as the default here except for the desktop icon. And go ahead and let it do the install. So while it's doing that, I'm going to close this browser window in the background. I don't need it. And we now have this set up. All right. So there is a launch here. If you wanted to do that, I'll just normally hit finish, uh, clean up whatever needed to be cleaned up here. And now with the desktop icon, I have that. You could also have, added that down under the taskbar if you wanted to do that as well. So I go ahead, double click it, and it will open up. All right. So now there's a lot of different setup that you could do in here. So I'm not going to go through every button, every menu setup and whatever with Visual Studio Code. Um, there's definitely a lot that could be done here. So I don't normally bother with the themes here. So I could just kind of close that getting started. And the first thing you probably want to go to is the extensions button right here. So extensions, we don't have anything installed yet, so we can go find the PowerShell extension for here. So I can click that, and we can see the PowerShell extension for VS Code or Visual Studio Code. All right, so there's an install button. Click that. It'll go ahead and install itself. All right. Choose a version of PowerShell. That's fine. Um, So it uh, so that gets me going with enough to kind of start with here. Okay, so we have that extension. So we could go ahead, clear that menu out, and now with that extension, notice it kind of added this PowerShell button right here. But what it also did is if I go up to File and just do a new file, and I want to do something here, I can select Text file, it wants a language, and PowerShell should now appear as one of the languages that I could select. So as you can see from the editor, there's lots of other languages that we have Visual Studio that VS Code has support for. So if you do like a lot of JSON or HTML, um, CSS, cascading style sheets. So, a lot of different support for a lot of different languages that are out there. If you wanted to kind of go through, definitely more. So there's some XML, YAML. So these are all different languages you might find yourself using as a Windows admin, in some way, shape, or form. So PowerShell. And then now we basically have a PowerShell text editor up here, very similar to like what the ISE would look like. So if I type in like, for instance, get, service, you see how the tab, the IntelliSense is with me here. So if I do dash name, and then even showing me what the services are here. So, kind of trying to help me out with, as much logic as it can here, if I wanted to utilize this. All right. And then down at the bottom, you do have a console down here. So we could see, for instance, if I type something here like, get host or something, we could see we have a running console down here. And if I do $PS version table, I could see this is running PowerShell 7.2. All right. So that would represent my console. Now, if you wanted to, you could change this console. So first of all, you could go add another console here. There is a plus button. So you could actually have two different PowerShell consoles running here. Okay, so I can kind of flip between the two. So that's kind of one of the cool things about VS Code is you could have multiple consoles. So you want to get rid of one, I can then hit the trash can button right there, and that gets rid of that console. You could also switch the PowerShell versions running in the console. So if I come down to the bottom here, you see the word PowerShell, and then next to it, there's the two curly brackets there. If you kind of highlight over that, um, you see this Show PowerShell Session menu, and you open that up and notice there's options here. So currently I'm in a PowerShell session. So remember, with just the word PowerShell, we're talking version 7. And notice the switch to Windows PowerShell x64, so that's the 64-bit, but hence notice the Windows PowerShell. So if I select that, it opens up a new console down here. And once I get the prompt here, I'll go ahead and type PS version table. And notice I'm now 5.1. So you can run either version of PowerShell 5.1 or 7 down in the console part here for VS Code. All right. So again, just if you want to switch them, just click the brackets. Just not click, highlight the brackets, select Show Windows Session or PowerShell Session menu, and then switch to the other version. So again, notice now that I'm in Windows PowerShell 64-bit, I have the option to switch to PowerShell 64-bit. Okay, so I'll select that, and now I'm back in a version 7 console here. All right. So one other change I would also make here, especially if I mainly use this for editing PowerShell. So notice here, like if I close Visual Studio Code and then I just open it fresh again, it brings me right back where I left off with the script. So let me, in fact, just get rid of that. Don't save. So now I have kind of a blank here. There's nothing, there's no file open. And then now let me open a fresh version of VS Code. It kind of brings you to the getting started page. And then if I want to work on a file, say I want to make a new file, I can go to new file. And then it brings kind of up this menu here where you can select text file, pick your language, pick PowerShell, and away you go. Well, what if I just want PowerShell to be the default, right? So if you go up to File, there's a Preferences and then a Settings. And then within Settings here, if you go into Expand Out Text Editor and go to Files and then go down a little bit here, there's an option for a default language. And I normally set that to PowerShell. Um, so once you type it in, hit enter, basically the setting, is now there. Let me make sure it took. Yep. So that the setting is now there. So you can close this. And now when I go up to like a new file, text file, it automatically goes to PowerShell. So if you notice, like right here, it does have the PowerShell icon. So this is now a PowerShell file without me having to tell it otherwise. So you can see the IntelliSense is picking it up and all of that. So that's probably the one change that I would recommend making, especially if you are mainly using VS Code to work with PowerShell. Like you're using VS Code as the new ISE, if you will. All right. So the last thing I wanted to show here is what if I wanted to use, so let me open up, let's say PowerShell 5 here, and type get module. Uh, so, so if we look here on by running get module list available, I could see what modules are available here by default. And notice that like you don't see Active Directory, for instance. And so normally this would be fixed by installing the RSAT tools on a client computer. That would get you all of the PowerShell modules for these different things. So if you wanted Active Directory module, if you wanted DNS server, DHCP server, those different management tools that you would find yourself using on a server, and you wanted to use the PowerShell commands to go with them, you would install the RSAT toolset to get these PowerShell modules. So on Windows 11, they're not they are there. You just have to kind of bring them out already. So RSAT's kind of already included. You just need to know to install it. So if I go to settings here, so however you find yourself getting to the settings app, so if you click the start button, you can select settings right there. You could right click the start and go to settings there as well. So you could pop that open and we're going to go to apps and we're going to want to go to, let's see, where were they hiding this? I believe it's under optional features. All right. So we could see here, okay, that there's this add an optional feature. So you can click this button to view. All right. And we have a whole bunch of optional features to choose from, right? There's a whole scroll down list. And notice all the RSAT stuff right here. Okay, so notice like there's RSAT Active Directory Certificate Services, RSAT Active Directory Domain Services, and Lightweight Directory Services. Keep going down. You see DNS, DHCP, failover clustering, group policy, IPAM, the NLB tools, so server manager. So all of the different stuff that we would normally associate with coming with RSAT. So I could go pick like if I wanted just the Active Directory ones in this case. So let's say I select that. Right, and you can hit that down arrow there and see what uh, extra details are there. Okay, and it does show that this has a dependency on Server Manager. So by clicking this one, you're also going to be getting Server Manager as well, which is in my case, I'm fine with that. So I could go ahead and select Next and install. And then that's going to go ahead and install these different RSAT tools. This does take a moment, so I'm going to pause the video for a moment here, let this install, and then I'll bring the video back in once it has finished. Okay, so we're back here, and if you notice, the install did work. So you see installed, restart required for this. So I'm going to go ahead and do a restart here real quick. Get logged back in, and then I will bring you back into the video here. So just going to pause during the restart. Okay, everybody, we're back off that reboot, and I've logged back in. So first of all, if I come back into settings, let's go to apps, optional features. I should see the two RSAT ones installed here, Server Manager and Active Directory Domain Services. And again, you could expand each one, and if you wanted to get rid of it, there's the uninstall button right there. All right. So now the last check, let me open up PowerShell console. Either 5 or 7 would be fine here. And then we could type get module list available. And that should get me Active Directory right there. Okay, so there's the Active Directory module in PowerShell ready to go. So that's just kind of a quick look of installing the RSAT tools minus a reboot. Apologize for that. And that'll do it for this video. So again, any questions, just give me a shout in the comments. If you like this content, please consider liking and subscribing. I definitely appreciate it, and it helps the growth of my channel. And stay tuned for the next video coming down the road. So have a good one, everybody, and we'll see you then.